welcome to our second roundtable of The Local Scene, a production of PAC TV. Our topic tonight is going to be movies. I'm Zach Dolan, your host, and I'm joined by Dave Antoine.
Thank you, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kendra D'Angora.
Hello.
Kendra.
Thank you.
Tiff Phillips.
Hi,
welcome.
Zach.
And Ben Alexander.
Hello.
Welcome. Today we're going to be covering topics from romantic films to documentaries, but we're going to start on a genre that a lot of people are hit or miss on, and that's horror movies. First, what are your feelings towards horror movies? Who's a fan? Who's not?
I'm a fan of horror films. It's a very broad genre. You can have so much fun with it. You can either just please the audience with total popcorn entertainment, or you can scare the crap out of them, or you can use it as a good basis for social commentary. Night of the Living Dead is one of my favorite films, and it gave me nightmares as a kid. But the social commentary was just, it was in every frame. I love that film.
Which film did you say?
Night of the Living Dead.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. All right.
How about you?
I like horror films, more mystery, more paranormal. When it comes to violence, I have a real hard time with that, though. But yeah, I like I like being scared.
Yep.
Zombie films are my specialty. I'm obsessed. Mostly, I like infected zombies, so 28 Days Later, that kind of stuff. I like the speedy ones. I like gore. I like a lot of Rob Zombie films where just people get hacked, but almost to the point where it's not real anymore. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I can take myself out of it. If it's too real, then it gets
You're
me in
reminded
a weird.
that it's just a movie.
Right, exactly. But if someone's gushing blood from a chainsaw, it's funny, and I can not feel for that person as much.
And yeah, I'm definitely a fan of horror movies. I think someone that works with movies and film, it's kind of cool to see all the new stuff they try and they really push limits with. And
One of my favorite choices, or one of my favorite films, was the original Evil Dead. It's such a low-budget film, but the genius and the fun of it is that it knows it's a low-budget film, so it has to get so much more creative in order to engage the audience, and that's why there are so many fans out there.
Yeah, and you've
spirit.
seen how much they've evolved with just how much technology and special effects have come out. How you compare older horror movies, but to the stuff they're coming out these days. But going back, you said Night of the Living Dead used to give you nightmares as a kid. What was the first horror movie that you guys saw that legitimately spooked you? Gave you those nightmares?
Any Stephen King, it terrified me. I was afraid to take a shower for a good couple of months. I was just afraid a balloon was gonna come out of the drain. Or Pet Cemetery, the sister with the spine condition that was just and you'll never walk again. I'm oh my God. So yeah, I didn't sleep in my own bedroom for probably 6 months.
I'd say the first horror movie that really probably gave me nightmares was The Exorcist.
I agree.
I saw that when I was a kid, and it was terrifying to see a normal teenage girl turn into the devil, basically, in a matter of days.
That voice probably didn't help.
No, and the head spinning around and everything, the vomit,
But when she walked
projectile
downstairs backwards and her head
Spider
was
walk.
completely turned around,
Yep.
that was very creepy.
Cinematography-wise, that movie was kind of the first in its kind. They used a lot of techniques that we consider very what's the word? I forgot the word, but it set the basics. They were moving walls with actual long pieces of wood. I forgot the word for it, but very basic, kind of old school.
Practical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
They were using their brains and actual hardware rather than CGI and green screen and things like that. So I really have a lot of respect for that movie.
Mm-hmm. Very tautly constructed.
Yeah, exactly.
But you any nightmares?
I have to say that I agreed with you on those films, but I had read the books, and the books scared me more than the films did. But my very first movie that scared me was Salem's Lot, because I was little when that came out.
Yeah.
And the kid at the door, or at the window, scratching at the window. And then, of course, The Shining, because Jack Nicholson was just so amazing.
Yeah.
But as an adult, the thing that creeped me out the most was the Human Centipede.
Oh my God.
It still disturbs me to this day.
That movie is vile.
It is vile.
That's
It
just
is.
one of those horror movies that kind of pushes the boundaries of what are people willing to go to scare someone who's watching the movie. But now going through all these movies, what do you think is the scariest movie of all time?
The Strangers, for me, I have a hard time with because it's so real and it's based on a true story.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's about this couple that is basically fighting or thinking about breaking up. They're in a remoted like log cabin, and these strangers are just like coming after them in this crazy mess. The end, a lot of spoilers, but I mean, the end, they give the reason why they attacked that couple, and it was because you were home. And that for me is like to not have any rhyme or reason just for the sake of killing is terrifying.
Anybody's a target.
Yes.
Like nobody is safe. You know,
You're not special. You were just there.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that, you know, anybody can be that type of target. You don't have to be a special person or anything or do anything special. You could just become, you know.
Which, frankly, if you're going to kill me, at least call me special. You know what I mean? How dare you, sir?
You have to have a reason.
Exactly. I'm a
can't just be that.
star.
Yeah.
I think one of the horror films, and it can also blend into sci-fi, that really scared the crap out of me was the 78 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Spoiler alert, I'm sorry, but the fact that these are everyday people and there is this infection, people are being replaced by these clones, and the people that are actually realizing it and no one believes them, and the people that don't believe them are now being replaced. So you don't know who to trust. And then, spoiler alert, you can't beat that ending.
Yeah.
The person that we're rooting for, that we followed, our hero, he's no longer the person we recognize.
Yeah.
And it's a genius ending.
So, and I know a lot of people these days don't like horror movies anymore because they feel like they're too scripted. You know, people, they're still making horror movies that, you know, kind of go off the plot and kind of stretch into that. This is what they're capable of doing. But you see so many people that just aren't scared by it. Like one of the series that I've heard the most about people being like hit or miss with is Paranormal Activity. You know, that's one of those movies that, you know, people, they expect stuff to happen. They know going in what's going to happen. It's going to be a bunch of people dealing with these crazy happenings. So I just feel like that's, with the horror movie genre, that's a lot of the times why it's hit or miss.
Well, I think we're also, how far can our society go? We have so much like with YouTube now and videos and just people doing very shocking things that we're almost just like, we don't have any innocence. We're just, how bad can we, how much can we stand to watch? And that's kind of how far the horror genre has had to stretch. It's like, how far can we go to make people scared? And lately it's very far. Like you have to be really shocking. Whereas maybe 10, 20 years ago, you know, a closed door would be scary, you know?
It's like with all those Saw movies, it's just like they made like 10 of them and they just kept going and coming up with more like messed up things to do and like ways to like torture people, you know, and it just is like, how far can you really like
And
push
Hostel
it?
is the same way.
Hostel,
yeah,
It's
another
just
one.
violent. I mean, there's really nothing, I mean, it's scary because it's happening to somebody, but it's
just
I mean, the
gratuitous.
element of fright is really not in there. It's just blood and gore.
Horror films sort of run into each other because we expect the jump scare. We expect the gore scenes. After a while, it just sort of becomes repetitive in itself that they have to go that distance with the Saw films and Paranormal Activity.
Yeah.
I mean,
Although-
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Well, the first Paranormal Activity is a very low-budget, simple film of couples being haunted.
Yeah.
And then Paranormal Activity, like 6 or 7, it's like the house is like Poltergeist. It's being ripped apart.
Yeah.
It was such a complete 180 from the first film.
Yeah, and I kind of liked that it was like unknown stars. I like the found footage, kind of genre, the subgenre,
Blair
if you will.
Witch.
I really liked that. I liked the idea when it first started. It was really interesting that like they were taking these unknown folks and like doing a really cool kind of sales pitch in a way that they were marketing this as like real movie, and I just thought that was really interesting.
I thought the marketing was more effective than the movie itself.
Very true.
Very.
I
Yes,
thought it
very
really had me engaged. I really wanted to see the movie, and I was so excited. And then when I saw the movie itself, I was kind of a little disappointed because the marketing had been so strong.
Right.
What's so brilliant about it too, this is before social media, this is before YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, they were going off this gimmick of trying to entice people saying this is actual found footage.
Yeah.
Which of course we knew it wasn't.
They did like a fake documentary and stuff and posted
Yes.
it online.
Mhm.
It was pretty cool.
For Blair Witch? Or
Yeah, for
Yeah.
when
I
it
never saw
originally
that.
started, they did like this really fake like documentary. They like interviewed children or like teenagers from like the other people's childhoods, and just like, oh well, she was a good kid, and like it was very bizarre.
Yeah, they had a website. They had the whole thing. They
went
made
all
it.
out.
Yeah, they did.
1999.
So now we're going to move on to the next genre, and it's kind of moving completely away from horror movies. And we're going to move on to romantic movies. You know, there's this so many people think it's another type of genre that's so scripted. You know, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy goes through some sort of, you know, adventure and then eventually wins her back. But so what are your feelings about romantic movies? And I know that I'm not seeing a lot of happy looks right now.
Blah.
Yeah.
Not my favorite.
Yeah.
I think there are romantic films that can be good, and then there are romantic films that follow a certain formula. I'll be the first to admit I like Crazy Rich Asians, but it is a pretty predictable formula. You know the girl's going to end up with the guy. Spoiler alert, but I think we're going to do that. But then there are well-crafted films. The Apartment is a good example, and it's a simple premise, but it's not just about the idea of boy meets girl. It's also about this boy trying to rise up through his company, and he's offering his apartment to his supervisors in order to get ahead, as his supervisors are using it for extramarital affairs. Plus, it had Billy Wilder, who is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time.
I would never consider that romantic, though. That's a comedy, you know, The Apartment.
And I think
But romantic films.
that's a
and
different
romantic
type of
comedies.
movie too, because a lot of people, what they look at that was a groundbreaking film for Asians in film. A lot of people are looking at that as like the big blow up. Where could they go from there?
Right.
Well, the last time a film that started a predominantly Asian cast was The Joy Luck Club, 25 years before.
Yeah.
There's not a lot like that.
Yeah, I think I like, in terms of romantic movies, I like that relationships are a subplot. Like, I like The Matrix. I love that the whole world's kind of falling around them, and they find each other in this kind of dystopian world. And I like that the romantic relationship isn't the main focus, so it doesn't get squeezed to death, you know? Those are my favorite kind of romance.
So like as a subplot of
Yeah.
the movie. So there's something else going on, but there's that underlying romance.
Yeah, but I do understand the appeal of a rom-com because, you know, society can get so dark sometimes that it's kind of nice to want, you know, the happily ever after, the fairy tale, and sometimes it's good. It's not real, but sometimes people need an escape. You
Okay,
know?
Ali will merge the two. You have Shaun of the Dead, which is a fun film. It's a romantic comedy and a horror movie.
That's a good subplot. Yeah.
Plus, it has Queen, which is pretty awesome.
I feel like a lot of people can tolerate romance more when there's a different genre going on. With it.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I feel like a straight up romance movie is just not going to hit. It's going to hit home for a very, very small amount of people. So, you know, you have these romantic films that people sometimes don't always like to admit they watch, but they do watch. So, moving on to guilty pleasure films. Do any of you have that one film that is that guilty pleasure?
Dirty Dancing.
Oh, really?
I hate to admit it, but it's true. Anytime it's on, I watch it.
Why? What's the appeal of that type of movie?
I think it's the time frame, the genre. Like they're in the Hamptons and what is it? The 50s, the 60s.
I think it's the 50s.
The 50s.
It's within that era.
Yeah.
Or the 60s.
I like time-oriented films very much, and I think that's the main attraction for me. Other than the fact that she's a young girl and she gets to experience all these things, you know.
You can just admit that you're crazy for Swayze. It's fine. We'll respect
He
that.
really was my least favorite part of that movie.
So I Married an Exporter with Mike Myers.
It's a great movie.
I think part of the reason why is because I go to San Francisco a lot to see family, and it reminds me of San Francisco because it was filmed exclusively in the city, and it treats San Francisco as a secondary character. Plus, it's Mike Myers trying out his shtick before Austin Powers, just sort of branching out. It's by no means a great film, but it's a fun movie, and it's essentially a black comedy as well, because the premise alone just says it all.
I'm struggling to come up with something, but what I recently bought the other day on DVD, Pain and Gain, which I know you like that.
That's a
as
good
favorite
film,
movie.
yeah.
I think it's gotten mixed reviews, I guess, from people I've talked to about it, whether they like it or hate it. But I think it's a great movie.
I feel like you can't base a guilty pleasure film off of that these days because people are going to be so cynical towards every film that comes out.
Yeah,
You know, there's going to be films that like everybody likes, but there's always going to be critics of a movie. So I mean, it's all depending on who you tell that you like that movie. Some people are going to be like, "Oh, great movie," or other people are just going to be like, "Why? What are you doing?"
Yeah.
So.
Annie, 1982 version. That's my ride or die. It's been like my favorite movie growing up. I know all the songs. I always shipped Daddy Warbucks and Grace Farrell. That was, growing up, that was like the relationship to aspire to. But yeah, love that movie.
Really touching on that, what about musicals? How does everybody feel about musicals?
I
Are
love
you
musicals.
a musical type person?
Yeah.
It depends on how they do the musical.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I love Phantom of the Paradise by Brian De Palma because it's basically this very twisted 70s version of Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Like cult movies like that.
And I get why people don't like musicals. I have a theater background, so I kind of have a soft spot for musicals, but I get that people are like, oh, why are they singing through the whole thing? Why isn't there any talking? And I guess I would always point out people to like Cabaret, where the music just takes place in like the club, and then everything else is just talking. So I totally get where people are coming from when they say they don't like musicals, but I have a very like nice place in my heart for musicals.
Musicals. No.
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
Great film. Yeah.
That's the only musical I like.
Oh, Tim Curry.
See, I feel that personally for me, musicals, I can't really do musicals, especially if they're singing, 15 songs over the course of a movie. Because for me, music especially, I don't really listen to the lyrics. Like I kind of let the beat carry it. And I feel like if the entire plot of a movie is singing, I lose the plot very quickly.
I agree.
As soon as
fair.
a musical number ends, it comes back and they start having this conversation, and I'm like, wait, what are they even talking about? They were just singing 5 seconds ago. I completely
Then
lost
their next
it.
conversation, they start singing about it.
They're singing about that last song, and now I'm just like, well, now I have to start from the beginning again. But I really don't want to, so I'll just shut up. So now kind of moving on from that, we'll move into documentary style films. What are your feelings on documentaries?
I think there are some great films out there.
Vital part of our society.
Very. It's basically a mirror up close of fragments of society. One film that I really like, and it's pretty disturbing, but it's fascinating, is Crumb, about this underground cartoonist named Robert Crumb, and it's a fly on the wall, and it just shows his life as it is and his background. And his background is not a conventional background. He didn't have a conventional upbringing, and it's uncomfortable to watch. You're seeing him with his family, and his family, as well as himself, are not people that we would assume to be normal. They're very unusual. But Crumb also has quite a following. He's one of the most famous underground cartoonists, and it's just stuff like that. That's why documentaries are so important, just to see this.
Yeah, you're definitely right. It definitely turns a mirror up to society to be like, oh gosh, this is happening. My favorite recent example is the Fire Festival documentaries. There was one on Hulu and one on Netflix. I was partial to the Netflix one, even though they had the guy who did the Fire Festivals before he went to jail. But I just thought and I just thought, why were people doing a documentary on this? I don't understand. And then it raised a point in the Hulu one that it was just like, this is kind of the epitome of internet culture, that, people are influencers on Instagram. And it kind of was like, this has all come to like a head now, and here we are, where it's really important to be seen. And that's like the main point of living now, is that if it didn't happen on Facebook, it didn't happen. And I thought that was just a really amazing couple of documentaries there.
You see that? Yeah. No, I as someone who works with documentaries every summer, I've learned to like documentaries more as I've gotten older. Also, back when I was in school, watching documentaries was always just so forced, I guess, and it was always about topics that weren't interesting. But seeing more documentaries on interesting material, it's interesting. Yeah. One documentary I saw recently was Icarus, which is I think it won Best Picture last year, or Best Documentary last year, about doping in the Olympics with Russia. Yeah, it was a good movie.
Documentaries?
Yeah, I like documentaries. Actually, they're watched a lot at my house, especially with Hitler being the topic. I don't know what.
Yeah.
But I find it's very interesting because it gives you a background of what happened and why it happened, and you get to see, I'm terrible with words, but
I feel like that's a good way to educate the public. But it's the same thing with the Fire Festival. I personally, if I watch a film and I end up with the Fire Festival, I had no idea what the Fire Festival was before I saw that. But what I found myself is going on Google and looking up this Fire Festival and figuring out the ins and outs of it. And I feel like it's a good way to educate it, because personally I'm one of those people that will learn a fact about the Fire Festival, search on Google for that fact, and I'll find 3 other documentaries on the same thing, and then it'll just lead me down that path. So I'll find out more and more about it. And with historical figures, that's a big thing that a lot of people do is they find all these documentaries that they never knew about, and they learn more and more and more.
Well, the footage that they collect for these documentaries too is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's like a story, and of course it really happened, but it really engages you because of the way they put it together.
Yep.
Especially World War II stuff where the footage is like 60, 70 years old.
Right.
Like it's hard to find all that.
Two documentaries that I think documented a time that's pretty much obscured now is Nanook in the North. It's a pretty old documentary, but it documents old customs and old processes of the indigenous people. If I'm getting that correct, I'm sorry. But that was a documentary that profiled that. And then Salesman by the Maisels brothers was about door-to-door salesmen, which that's a profession that no longer exists.
Right.
And this documentary just captures that profession as a fly on the wall, and I just found that endlessly fascinating.
So about these documentaries versus you see so many films these days that are based off true stories. Documentaries go the narrator style and interviews and all that, but the based off true stories are cinematic pieces. So are you guys attracted to those based on true story type? And what are some of the ones that kind of stand out to you?
I mean, I do, but you do have to take it with a grain of salt that there is going to be some artistic changes and that people are not always going to stick to how it actually happened. Right. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody serves as that. People got really angry that wasn't, word for word, that's what happened in his life. But they're making a movie. And even the band knew that they were going to take some, artistic license.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like loosely based. And, they give the disclaimer. So you got to take it for what it is.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of movies based off true stories. First thing I can think of is Forrest Gump. It's not like a real story, but he has so much history and like real things that happened, like thrown into that movie that it's a huge compilation.
I'm going to give a shout out to Noelle if she's watching this. Man on the Moon, which is about Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
As we know, he was an avant-garde comedian. But they did take liberties. There were certain things in his life that didn't happen in that film in order.
Did you see the documentary about Jim Carrey and how
which is directed by one of the men who made the Fire Festival documentary, Chris Smith.
No way.
Yes.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
I loved Andy Kaufman. But they took artistic license because they were treating Andy Kaufman not so much as a real human life subject, but as a movie character that we had to root for. And the ending when they give him a send-off with the big Christmas send-off, that was taken out of order. But it's for a film, they have to engage the audience, which I understood.
I agree. But, but I could be a nerd too. And if they don't stick to the real story, sometimes I get a little disappointed.
Yeah.
But I do like movies based on true facts.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, especially if you're not well versed in the art of filmmaking, you don't see how could they not stick to what actually happened. But when you're behind the camera and you're trying to figure out, you got to take into account what's going to bring people into that theater. And so a lot of people are based off of I need to make this as interesting as possible, even though it might not be the most interesting subject. We have to consider that. And one of the films that sticks out to me is Argo. Argo, it was a topic that I knew nothing about going into seeing that movie, but as soon as I saw it, I wanted to learn more about it. And another one that I could think of was American Sniper with Bradley Cooper. That was personally one of my favorite, based off true stories, inspirational stories, because you learn so much about, you hear about this guy, you hear about the stuff that he's doing, and then they make this movie and you learn what actually he was going through. That was one of those things that, he was a veteran. We know what the veterans deal with when they come back from war. We don't, but we know that it's there, but we don't know actually what they're going through.
Yeah.
So that was just one of those movies that really stuck out to me personally.
One of them that's dead on is Zero Dark 30, where they basically don't give the person a backstory. You barely know her name. And you really don't know her name because obviously her identity is confidential because, she was in with torturing, Middle Eastern citizens. But it was just really interesting, what the background was that and a time that was just really scary for everyone. I don't think anyone really knew what was going on in the Middle East, and I don't think we still do. So it was really kind of interesting to see people who were, kind of in the thick of it. I just found it fascinating.
What I liked about that film too is the weaving cast of characters. You know, it's not one particular ensemble. These are all people who were involved somehow in the military, the government, and how they have to handle this particular situation. They weave in and out of that story.
Yeah.
And it's just how it is.
Yeah.
Like real life.
And I feel like casting a lot of the times goes into that as well. You know, choosing your actors wisely. Well, I forget what the title was, but it was the story about the train jacking in Paris.
The 1517 to Paris.
1517 to Paris.
Oh,
I forgot
right,
the time.
right.
I forgot the time. But in that, they actually cast the people. I know that was a big miss on that because they cast the people, the people who were actually involved in the train jacking, the 3 soldiers who stopped it, into that movie.
The actual people.
Yeah,
not
so
actors.
they took the actual people from the train jacking and cast them into that movie. And I know that was a big miss with a lot of people because they were like, it's one of those things where you want to keep it as close to home as possible. So, you know, when directors look at that, they're obviously going to be like, if we can cast these guys into it, that's going to make it so much more close to home and, you know, a personal experience. But so many people look at it and they say, if you had actually taken actors who have done this before, how much more could you have brought that film? Or
No PTSD there either. Like,
No, right,
let me just relive this
that
really
was the
hard
big thing.
point
It
in my
was
life.
just like, it was a little bit weird hearing it at first, but it's like I can hear both sides as to why they would want to show this, and they would want to probably make it more accurate to what it was. But that was one of those things that they just didn't hit the mark with keeping it interesting.
I mean, the problem is if you can't tell a good story, then you shouldn't try to sell it. You know, that's the whole point of a movie. Like I know that they were trying to keep it as real as possible, but again, the point is lost if you can't tell a decent story.
It was just one of those ideas of too much buildup.
Yeah.
And not enough action. But you see those movies that some movies jump into that action in the first 5 minutes. People are getting, you know, shot left and right, and especially in like horror movies, if they start right off with the heads getting cut off and everything like that in the first 5 minutes. But then you have other movies that are like, we're going to build up the plot for an hour and a half, and then.
Sounds like that would have been a better documentary, 1517 to Paris.
Yeah.
Than,
Yeah, oh yeah.
Than
And
like an
I'm sure
actual
they
movie.
I'm sure they have documentaries about it. I haven't seen it, but I know that it was big because it was on the big screen, and they were trying to bring light to this event that happened overseas. But what's your take on how much buildup is too much buildup for a movie? How much?
Are we talking for films based on real life subjects?
Well, let's talk about both. For films based on, are you going to give more leeway to films based off real life?
I think it depends really on the content and the situation. Goodfellas is a great film, but we're documenting a man's life as he grows up in the mafia, which there's several years of all these people he encounters, versus, you know, things that are situations like the 1517 to Paris, which I'm not talking down to what happened. It was a horrible thing and a heroic thing, but that was essentially, you know, one situation that happened very quickly versus something like Goodfellas, where their buildup just sort of gets right into the story, and we're seeing Henry Hill grow up in this lifestyle. I think it depends on the content and the director, of course.
If you have a long buildup, you got to do it wisely. You know, it's got to connect. Why are you doing a buildup? Are you trying to build up suspense, or is it a key to the plot line? I come at it from like a writing perspective. That I like when I write, I like to get people off the first page. Like I want people in right away, and that's kind of how I feel about movies. I like to be hooked like right away. Okay, ooh, you got me. If it's too much, I kind of will tune out. It's just the way my brain works.
I'm trying to think of movies that do build up well. I'm trying to like a blank on
I'm drawing a blank
anything,
myself.
you know.
I think Alfred Hitchcock does a good build-up.
Yeah, he does.
He's very subtle in his horror, and I think it's like Psycho, for example. Like she is just like an everyday bank teller. She steals, and then she gets to the hotel, and it's boom. All right, here we go. I like the way he tells a story. It's got a little bit of suspense. So you can do it right. You can do it right. You know.
And what was great about the beginning of that movie is the tension that she's feeling while she's driving, and the cop is watching her, and she's really aware of her surroundings. And but then when she is having the sandwich with him, it seems like she's not aware of her surroundings as much as she was before, and she should be.
She lets her guard down.
Yep.
Hitchcock is just very psychological. You know, he gets inside of your head. He knew how to tell a good story. And I think sometimes that element is missing in more contemporary film.
So moving on towards, actors in the movies becoming directors. What's your feeling on that? Yep. So I was going to ask, do you groan when you hear that, or are you kind of like, all right, we'll see.
I think they all should get their shot because you get someone like Clint Eastwood that was a great actor and he makes amazing movies, but.
I don't know. I just think there's a lot of actors who just wear the headset and like people do the other work and it's like, I'm a producer now. I'm a director now.
I'm going to put my name as producer, but
I got a
how much do
headset.
I
I think it can be hit or miss. Charlie Chaplin, The Circus, The Gold Rush, The Great Dictator. When they grab you, they're very emotional films.
He started off as a creator though.
He did, but he's been able to, straddle the line between actor and director. Same with Buster Keaton.
Yeah, but you're talking about like film way back when film first started. We don't have that much anymore. But it's very much like you stay in your lane and I'll stay in mine.
Right.
So when they cross over, it's like the people who are like singers.
But they had started out being directed by directors as well.
Yeah, that's
Charlie
fair.
Chaplin was directed by Max Sennett, and then he wanted to go his own way.
That is fair.
John Cassavetes, I'm a big fan of his work. He was the godfather of independent film, and he, started out as an actor, and he would occasionally act in his films, but he made films that were really about the ugliness of the human condition, and his films pretty much highlighted that. The Woman Under the Influence is a very uncomfortable film to watch as you're watching this couple's marriage disintegrate due to mental issues, and it's fascinating.
And one last thing I just want to touch on because we are running out of time, as far as soundtracks to movies, is the soundtrack make the movie for you?
Oh yeah.
So what are some of the soundtracks that?
Two of my favorites are The Graduate, where Simon and Garfunkel actually wrote that album for that movie, and it serves such an important purpose. And you listen to that song, you listen to that soundtrack now, and you can picture every scene from that movie. Another one is Magnolia. Amy Mann is so eerie. She does this version, this cover of One is the Loneliest. Yeah. And just the way she uses her bass line, it is so integral to that movie. So those are my two tops for soundtracks.
Anything Quentin Tarantino usually is pretty good on the soundtrack. He picks like such a huge range of music, and it always works for all of his scenes. So.
Kill Bill, those fight scenes.
Kill Bill, Pulp Fiction, like Reservoir Dogs,
Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight
had a great. That was
Ennio
fantastic.
Morricone.
Yeah.
Or Django Unchained. He had some very unique songs in that you would never put to a Western, but he did it really well.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite soundtracks is High Fidelity, just because the film is about a record collector.
Yeah.
And another John Cusack movie, Grosse Pointe Blank, just because it has all these 80s, tunes, because it's about a hitman who grew up in an 80s high school. Just thought that was an amazing soundtrack.
I have to agree with him. That's my favorite because I'm a huge Clash fan, and that was a great soundtrack. And there was an animated film in the 70s that I was very attached to, The Point, and that soundtrack is very good as well.
I'm going to go look that up when I get home. I know. You're onto something, Kendra.
A lot of new things to look up today. Well, we are unfortunately out of time at this point, so I do want to thank Dave, Kendra, Tiff, and Ben for joining me today on this. And thank you for watching our second round table. We'll see you next time when the topic will be, stay tuned. Good night.